You're listening to More Spell on You by Eddie Johns. I don't blame you if you don't recognize it. It's one of the thousands of disco tracks released during the 70s that got lost in the crates. But if you slow it down a bit, take these individual notes and play them back like this, it turns into one of the most recognizable dance tracks of all time. But what exactly about this turns a relatively unknown disco track into a genre-defining dance hit? Let's find out.
One more time.
Released in 2000, One More Time is an iconic record that can be heard on dance floors across the world to this day. It was the first track Daft Punk made for their sophomore album, Discovery. Although they are now well known, Tomás Bangalter and Guy Manuel de Homem Cristo were a duo shrouded in mystery at the time. They had already become household names after the release of their critically acclaimed and commercially successful debut album, Homework. They made Homework after they discovered and fell in love with the rave scene in Paris. It was a rough and raw manifesto for electronic music at the time. However, believing that the spirit of house music was to experiment and innovate, they wanted to challenge themselves to do something different. So their focus for Discovery was emotion, to learn how to utilize chords and melodies to add emotional undertones to their dance records. As they started making house music, they became more interested in what was influencing that genre, as most of the house music at that time was made of filtered disco and funk samples, music that Tomás and Guy Manuel would later on realize were influences early on in their childhood. And if you look at all the currently known samples from Discovery, it's all music from their childhoods. One More Time pushed the boundaries of electronic music and house music at the time of its release, and uses a simple yet effective technique of tension and release to create the infectious rhythm we all know and love today. This is best illustrated by the basic chopping. Here, you can tell that they're focusing on chopping up the different chords on the record, using them to create a new euphoric melody. The new melody itself creates a feeling of anticipation, where you want the beat to land back on the first note. But it's not just about the melody, it's also about the rhythm that they're playing the chords in. The first chord is repeated 3 times, but when the second chord comes in, it comes in just slightly off beat, throwing the listeners off just a little bit. Without this simple trick, these chops would sound really boring. This minimalistic tension and release technique is illustrated once more in the last chop. It's both higher in pitch and shorter, and it's repeated multiple times. It's like an EDM drop, but more minimalistic, where anyone can intuitively feel that anticipation and tension. Once the beat does land again, it gives us that satisfactory feeling of release. And since the One More Time loop basically does this every single bar, it makes the track that much more addictive to listen to. So it's important to remember that when trying to create dance classics that could be played at parties for decades like this one's been, that it's not about the most advanced chopping, triplet grooves, or having the longest, most dramatic buildups. Oftentimes, it's about creating those simple and addictive loops just like this one, that are groovy, instantly recognizable, and have small buildups, and those small, constant, satisfactory releases within them, making them classics on the dance floor that make you want to listen to them just
One more time.
Okay, so there are a couple of ways to start digging for your samples on TRACKLIB. One of the easiest ways that I like to use is by going to the collections page. These are all collections inspired and curated by our editorial team. They're inspired by the artists that you're going to be listening to, whether it's 50 Cent or SZA, for example. These are collections of samples that sound like something that might be on their album or have been utilized on their album in the past. You can also use the search function up here if you really want to. And if we wanted to find something that was close to Discovery, we can just type in Discovery at the top. And you can see here at the bottom, we have this collection of Daft Punk records that could potentially sound like something that they would have used on that album. The other way to go about this is to go to the track section. Now, on the track section, you'll be able to dig through the entire library on TRACKLIB and utilize these filters in order to narrow down what you're looking for. So you can go into genres themselves and start filtering out different tracks from our entire collection. So we know that they use some disco, some funk. Let's go with some rhythm and blues and some soul just in case. Now we've narrowed that down. Now we also know what release years they were utilizing, right? So we know it was in the 70s and the 80s. So we can narrow this down even further. If you know exactly what you want, you can go in here and be very particular about what years and decades you want to sift through. You can also go through different BPMs and different regions in case you want a specific type of sound. So I'm actually going to go through the collection and find something that I want to use to show the technique. There we go, something like that. All right, so I'm gonna actually download that and I'm just gonna listen through the entire track and I'm gonna start mentally tagging where I think I can pull out specific samples or sections of the record. All right, so I think I found my chops. So I'm just gonna lay down these chops that I found here. I'm just gonna give myself a basic backbeat. I'm gonna do 4 on the floor. 4 on the floor means a kick drum on every beat. The clap is going to come in on the 2 and the 4. And then hi-hats on the end. Now it's very robotic. So I'm moving the hi-hats off the grid slightly, and then I'll do the same with the claps to create a little bit more groove. And then I'll utilize this so that I can grab my chops and come up with an idea. Basically what I did here, and I'll break it down, I used 2 chops to create the quarter note chop. The reason I did that is because I really wanted to capture this one section here where that first chop is happening, but because it's out of tempo, it's completely out of tempo if I just press one of the notes. So I chopped up the kick and the snare so that I can control the tempo a little bit better. That would be as if it was a quarter note chop, really. And then on the end, I'm using a horn stab. Now the horn stab was something that I knew I wanted from the very, very beginning. And it was something that I knew I needed to find in the sample. So I chose to chop up that. And it has a vocal on it, which is really, really cool. It has like the... And as you can see, I chopped up parts that aren't necessarily... They're just sections. They're not loops. They're just little elements that I could utilize in the way that I did. And the last element that I chose to use from the chops that I had is that vocal chop to do that breakdown that Daft Punk does on One More Time. And I'm just literally doing it 4 on the floor. All right, so as you can see, I started my journey on TRACKLIB by digging through the samples, finding a collection that had discovery samples. I found something that I really, really liked, listened to it, and started chopping it up. If you're inspired by this and you want to make your own style, your own record, it doesn't matter what genre you want to create, check out the discovery collection in the description below.